We know that relationships are impacted by trauma. You're familiar with your story, so now we're putting those two pieces together to get curious about what barriers may be showing up when you experience a trigger that hinders connection with your partner. In order to go there, here's two questions for you. When a trigger sensation courses through your body, what are your responses? And then number two, what types of situations cause them? We cannot erase the event that happened. You can heal the impact caused by the event. And an insightful first step to get to the core of the impact is to identify your triggers. So let's go there together. What is a trigger? Has somewhat become a buzzword, so we want to get really clear about what we're talking about here. There are emotional triggers and trauma triggers. Emotional triggers can be memories, objects, people that spark this intense emotion within us. Trauma triggers are reminders of past experiences. These show up through intense, unexpected emotion like overwhelm, sadness, panic, very strong reactions. Some people can experience flashbacks to the triggering event, even to the point of losing sight of their surroundings and getting sucked into reliving the moment. Locations and anniversaries, or even an internal process, can also be triggers. A trigger comes from a past moment that was just brought to mind based on what's happening in the present. So, how I came to recognize my sexual trauma for the first time was when I drove by a location that initiated a flashback. And instantly I had confusion, overwhelm, and anxiety. My body vibrated. This process, it can be entirely subconscious, and mine all were until I had a flashback. But our goal here is to bring this hidden process that's happening all on autopilot to the light and see what's going on there. Triggers embed themselves into our brains through our senses. So when a smell or a sound occurs, that can even bring back a memory. So you may be wondering, I have this example, is this a trigger or not? A good indicator of a trigger is that the change in emotion is abrupt. It can feel more intense than what the situation would logically induce, but it brought up in you this abrupt, instant change in demeanor, in the way your body felt, in the way you reacted to what's going on. An example for me is the first time that my partner was laying on me. We were just making out, and the weight of his body brought back this feeling of not having control or not being able to move. And a logical response would have maybe been, hey, kind of uncomfortable, you're heavy, can you just scooch off? But instead, I was overwhelmed with dread and panic that I would be forced to do something, even though this person was safe. So the logical response wasn't accessible by my brain. And that's a great point, that when a trigger shows up, you cannot be, or you can totally be safe. But because of what your body and your brain are remembering, you may feel how you did in the original moment when the trauma happened. So logical? No. But understandable? Yes. Relating this specifically to sexual trauma experiences, triggers can happen at any time. It might not even be during intimacy, but a story or phrase someone said that reminded you of your experience. So for me, triggers show up when I feel trapped because that mimics my sexual trauma events. So even the word trapped will induce a response in my body. So that's what triggers are. And now I want to touch on how they feel when you're experiencing one. Building awareness for sexual trauma triggers takes time. Building really awareness for triggers in general, it takes awareness and time. There are 4 ways that our mind and our body react to triggers. So I'm going to use sexual trauma examples for each response to get your mind just wandering to how you might have responded when that event happened. Please keep in mind, if what I said just brought up tightness or tingling in your body, Be aware of that you may need to pause before continuing with this exercise, and that's okay. So, the four responses, we'll start with fight. So, relating to physical or to sexual trauma, this can look like physical fighting, pushing, struggling, fighting verbally, saying no, feeling intense anger. The flight response, my first noticing of a sexual trigger was when I got in a relationship with my current partner. Making out on the couch, his arm was kind of by my head. He was laying on top of me, like I mentioned before. But there was something about the way his arm was placed by my head that triggered that feeling of trapped. I immediately felt panic, like I needed to get out of the situation. My anxiety would not calm down. I got up, started walking around, and that was my way of running, flight. The freeze response, an inability to move when a threat is present. During one of my sexual trauma experiences, I was so shocked that the person I knew was violating me and moving my body that my mind and body froze. It felt like I numbed out, floated above my body until it was over. And when I recall that memory, I can still feel what I felt in that moment of freezing, numbing, and dread. That's a freeze response. The fourth response is fawn. So immediately, fawn is this trying to please to avoid any conflict. So an example with sexual trauma experiences could be, I had learned more than once that men would get mad if I didn't give them what they wanted sexually, and it could get scary or violent. So in future situations, whenever I saw any similarities to previous experiences, I would have that reminder, and my response was to give them what they wanted out of fear that it would escalate. So this fawn response. What you may have picked up on is that you can have different responses to different events. You can't predict which response you'll have, but from the four trauma responses here, can you identify which one may have appeared when your event happened? Because knowing your response can relieve shame and bring awareness to future interactions. And here's the best news about triggers, is that they're not here to put us in more pain. They are not here to cause more problems, even though it may feel that way sometimes. But their purpose points to areas that are begging to be healed. Their purpose is to protect you from real and perceived danger. So retracing back to a time where you felt danger can bring greater self-insight and heal triggers. And healing triggers heals relationships, and as you can imagine, brings greater internal peace. Now to the how. So the next part of your healing roadmap is going to be linked below this video, and the exercise is 2 pages. This is a very important exercise. Building awareness for triggers is incredibly like a cornerstone for healing. The first page in this exercise, it's going to walk you through identifying how your initial trauma response showed up, and then get curious about how the impact may have evolved in your present. So these 3 questions are going to spiral to get to the core root feeling while observing your reactions. It also looks at the situation that prompted the response. These 3 questions bring awareness for the purpose of healing. So you can start with any one of them, start with what you know, and challenge yourself to be honest as you dig deep. But the 3 questions are, I feel heightened emotional response when this happens, I react by, and then I feel. What you're doing is identifying the pattern. And the purpose here will be to look at this pattern, invite the Lord in as you heal. And later on, we'll discuss how to uproot patterns as we gently try different. But you cannot uproot a pattern if you are unable to identify it. One small note before you go. Blank times. I know I have triggers, but I cannot remember the events that they would have come from. Or is there a period in your life that you describe as blank or you can't remember at all? I'd encourage you to seek out a trauma therapist. These holes in memory can point to trauma that your brain has blocked out to protect you from remembering. An example could be if you have strong emotions swell up when you're having sex that seem out of place and you're unsure where they come from, it could be from an unprocessed past experience. Could. And as frustrating as it is to not be able to remember, I find that God brings back those memories just the right time to bring healing.